Hello, Vets of Tomorrow. As a veterinarian interested in working in the field of animal welfare, you've probably considered working for an NGO. There are lots of different NGOs working in lots of different fields associated in one way or another with animal welfare. And today I'm talking to Lesley Moffat, who has set up her own NGO in a way that she felt would really make a difference. Could you tell me about your story, Lesley?
Sure. Yeah, I started up an NGO called Eyes on Animals, and we're registered in Amsterdam, but we work all over Europe, Turkey, and now also Ghana. And our focus is solely on how to improve the welfare of animals during transport and slaughter, or rather, I should say, how to reduce the suffering of animals during transport and slaughter. So the focus is on farm animals, and our work is primarily in the field. We're not so much a campaign or a lobby group, but really people who go out into the slaughterhouses or check on trucks. They're where the animals are.
And how did you get the idea?
So I got the idea when I was quite young. I was in bed and very sick with the whooping cough in Germany, actually. I was living in Germany for a year with my parents. And my mom felt sorry for me and thought, oh, Lesley has nothing to do for 2 weeks. She can't go to school. I'm going to buy her a whole lot of books and magazines. My mom was a librarian, so we always had to read a lot at home. And she made the very big mistake of buying a magazine called The Animal's Voice, which on the cover just had a picture of a cow and a calf. And she knew I liked animals. I can't tell you why I liked animals so much. I think some people are just born with this innate interest in looking at animals. I think a lot of kids are like that naturally and lose it with time, but I still had it very much in me at age 12. And inside was a totally different picture from the cover. So my mother had made the mistake of not looking inside. It was actually an animal rights magazine showing the reality behind our meat and dairy in many, not all, but on many farms, slaughterhouses, and transport journeys of animals. And I was totally shocked, because up until then I was spending my summers at a beef farm that my grandparents owned. So they had 40 heifers in Ontario. I knew my grandparents very well, and they were the most empathic people ever. So for me, I always knew meat came from animals, and I remember also often asking my grandmother, how do they kill them? And she was from a Jewish background, and she used to say to me, well, there's even a religious figure in the slaughterhouse that thanks them and offers them to God in a sense. And so in my head, I just imagined this animal being brought in very slowly, being pet, and people saying thank you, and a religious person then performing the task as calmly as possible. That was my imagination as a kid. You're a bit innocent and naive. I didn't realize that actually you have to kill sometimes 40 cattle per hour in these slaughterhouses. So of course there's no time to be that kind and that calm with the animals. But anyhow, so when I opened this magazine, I just thought, this can't be true, the way we're treating animals, that we're raising them in small spaces, that some animals are never even going outside, that we're separating the babies as soon as they're born, that we're cutting parts of their bodies off, that this was just gruesome. It was like a horror story for me. So I started asking questions to my grandparents, but also to people around me, to other farmers near where they lived. And then when I was 16, I decided I was either going to be a vet or an ethologist. So when I went to university, I started taking biology courses, and I got into the animal science program at University of Guelph. I thought I wanted to be a vet, but I had a very good teacher from the Czech Republic, Dr. Hernick, and he was teaching pig behavior. He was also a vet and had been a farmer in the Czech Republic, emigrated to Canada after the war, but he told me, it's very important to know how to heal an animal that's suffering from an illness, but it's also important to heal an animal that's suffering psychologically, that's not happy. Is an animal happy? And I thought, yeah, that's what I want, because I loved veterinarians, and I love the veterinarian field, and I think that's super important. But at the time, ethology was quite new and not yet heard of, and the whole idea of asking an animal if it was happy was considered anthropomorphic and a bit ridiculous. But at the same time, you had people like Jane Goodall, who were bringing credibility to that whole concept of you can give a name to an animal, you can say an animal has a personality. So I decided to study ethology. And when I became an animal science student at university, I also had the opportunity to start going to slaughterhouses. So we had a slaughterhouse at our university, but that was quite well run. Okay, you're faced with death, that is always confrontational, but it was a quiet, slow-moving slaughterhouse. But I also started going to very big chicken slaughterhouses in Canada. And that's when I realized, hey, this is where I have to be. This is where I can make a difference. And also, even though I didn't have much experience back then, just a normal person could see that there was tons of potential to reduce suffering in a slaughterhouse. Just the noise, for example, if you could reduce the noise, then that would reduce the stress and fear of many animals arriving. So that's pretty much when I got the idea that I wanted to focus on farm animal welfare during slaughter and transport.
And focusing on the idea is one thing, but then to put it into practice, I think probably a whole different story. So how did you go about that?
Well, I think going to my very first slaughterhouse made me realize it's possible you can work in the field. I was really nervous. I went by myself too. And I remember going into the car after and just crying and feeling shocked. I mean, it's very confrontational when you first see animal slaughter. But I also realized it's not something that should be hidden, and it's something that everyone should know about, especially in our society where we still depend and use so much from the animals. So I started going to livestock markets. Also, I like being around animals. I like looking at animals. I like observing their behavior. So in Ontario, where I was at University of Guelph, I started going regularly to livestock markets. I did that also in Quebec. And then I came across my first opportunity to rescue some animals. So there were some pigs left behind a market in Quebec that were dead, sows and boars. And on top there was a piglet, I think not older than 3 months of age. And she was still alive. And so I asked if I could take her. And they said, yeah, she's good for dead. And the owner doesn't want her back. So I brought her to a sanctuary. And then I did the same thing for another pig that was a downer that couldn't use her front legs. And I realized just by talking straight with the people, saying, look, I'm here, I'm concerned about the welfare of this animal, can I take the animal? Instead of just filming discreetly and then getting all upset about it, I was able to actually help those two animals. And then I started talking more and more to the directors of the markets in Quebec about getting water, about getting shade, about unloading animals more calmly, or that the downers at least be put aside in a corner and not dragged through the whole market. With every little change that you're able to get into place, that gives you energy to do the next change. And I wasn't scared of talking directly with the people. I think it's always in the tone of the message. It's not just the message. Of course, I had a message that they could have interpreted as being confrontational, that I was saying, that the welfare of the animals wasn't okay at their facility. But I tried to just be open about my concern and not judgmental about it, because then they just get defensive, and then while they're getting defensive, the animal would still be suffering. So you don't want to bring out defensiveness in people. You want to find a solution, and sometimes that means helping them find a solution.
But from the practical point of view, like if you go as one person to the markets and you talk, but now you have a whole organization where people are working for. So how did you make the transition, for example, with getting funding from being your own initiative to a professional organization?
Yeah, I guess that came with growing up. At the time, I was still a student, so I didn't have that much time, and it was all voluntary based. But when I graduated, I worked at a sanctuary outside of Montreal for chimpanzees and farm animals. So there I also got a lot more experience on feeding animals, taking care of animals, etc. And at that sanctuary, I was going to markets because I had the opportunity to rescue animals, to bring them to a sanctuary. Also at Farm Sanctuary in upstate New York. But then in 2001, I fell in love with a German farmer who was doing an exchange at my university. And he got called up all of a sudden saying, you have to come home, your uncle's dead, you have to help take over the farm. So I went to Germany. I was a young girl, I was maybe 22, thinking I'll just go for a year experience. And there I came into contact with an NGO called Animals Angels, which is a German organization that also works throughout Europe. And they were looking for someone who spoke French to take care of their investigations, to run their investigations in France and other French-speaking countries like Lebanon. So I got hired by them. And I think that's when I first really realized that this could become a career and something professional, not just as a volunteer, because I was paid by them. And I was out of the house at least 10 days a month, trailing trucks, visiting livestock markets, and then also starting up a training program in France. Because as a Canadian, I had always heard at university that Europe was much better than Canada for animal welfare, because there are laws here protecting animals during transport and slaughter that are stricter than anywhere else in the world. But when I came to France, I realized that a lot of those laws were just on paper. And when I used to see animals dying on trucks or overcrowded trucks, I would call the gendarmes, and they would always say the same thing to me. Sorry, we can't come. We have no idea what the heck you're talking about. Luckily, I had a boss that let me be quite creative. So I started a police training program in France, and then all of a sudden we were allowed to stop trucks. We were with the police. We could enforce the law. We could sanction. That also made me realize this could be something professional. This is possible. And in 2008, I moved to the Netherlands. Why? Part of it was personal reasons. I felt really good in the Netherlands. I thought if I'm not going to migrate back to Canada, then I want to be in a culture that I feel good in. So that was Holland. But I was also doing more and more work for Animals Angels in the Netherlands, because Holland is one of the biggest exporters and importers of farm animals. And I was often at the livestock market in Leeuwarden, where there are lots of culled dairy cows. There were many welfare problems at that market back then. And I realized it's a country with so many animals, so there's going to be problems that have the potential to be fixed. But it's also a culture where I find, as a Canadian, Dutch people sometimes disagree with me, but I find that the people in the industry, a lot of them, not all, you can talk to them. You can really have an open, serious conversation with them. So that for me was a sign that here we have potential to make a change. We can start innovative projects, pioneer projects that we can then spread to other countries where it's a bit more difficult to open the doors. Like France was more difficult at the time, Canada as well. And I started my own NGO because as much as I liked Animals Angels, they were very much focused on reporting the problems and then sending the reports of the problems to the European Commission or to the officials of the different countries. And I was realizing that that you could get changes faster by going directly to the person causing the problem. So the truck driver or his boss or the slaughterhouse manager. So I wanted to create an organization where we worked more directly with industry and a little bit less going through the official authorities.
And that's something you touched on earlier, the way of communication. And that's something, what I also read on your website, you feel quite important about, is to actually keep the dialogue open.
Yeah, absolutely. Because first of all, there is no one perfect. I mean, I'm not better than anyone else, and we're all creating suffering in this world, whether you like it or not. Maybe we've gone vegan in Amsterdam, but we're using cars and planes and just biking. You're killing tons of insects. So we're all responsible for causing suffering, and we're all responsible for how intensive the industry has become, how cheap our food products have become. So we all together have to find a solution. So I think the message has to be something, it has to be based on open dialogue to get anywhere. And also, often I find that when you get two people with different opinions together and they just stay so defensive on their opinion, the only thing that results from that is that the animals are underneath waiting, saying, can you guys just get along so I can finally get some water? I can finally get a bit more space on this truck. So there's no point. It's not a human issue. We're not suffering by the fact that animals are overcrowded on the truck. We have to focus on the animal. So how do you get the animal more space on the truck? It's not by staying 100% true to your principles and fighting with the driver. It's to get the driver to open his eyes, to help him make the right choice. And then the animals benefit from it. So it shouldn't stay up high on a human debate level or a political level. It should be solution oriented. And to find solutions, you need teamwork. And you can't create a team if you're just going to fight or judge each other.
And could you give us some examples of that? Because Turkey, you've recently been able to import stunning equipment, but that wasn't an easy storyline, was it?
No, Turkey was Turkey was a really difficult country to work in, and it kind of came across our path haphazardly. In 2011, Europe opened the borders, and Turkey as well, to export animals from Europe to Turkey. Before then, it wasn't allowed. And so all of a sudden, we had truck drivers calling us nonstop saying, you guys need to come to the border between Europe and Turkey because there are super long waiting lines. And in the summer, animals are dying. It's too hot. There's no shade. There's only one water source, one fire hydrant. And some days there were 20 livestock trucks. And some of them were waiting even 10, 12, 14 days was the longest we've ever seen. And you can imagine, like, even if you want to import something from China, for example, let's say you order a pair of socks from China, you've got to pay customs on it. Sometimes the package takes a month, sometimes it takes 2 months. There's all sorts of administration things to organize. So now imagine it's a live animal. So these live animals were arriving in Turkey. The importer all of a sudden said, oh, I don't want them anymore because the custom import tax is too expensive. I need to first make a deal with the customs to get that price down. I didn't realize it was so expensive. Or one is missing an ear tag, or one on the truck does not correspond to the one that I ordered when I was in France 2 months ago selecting my animals. Like, there's all sorts of problems that can happen with paperwork, with the health status of the animals, and with money. So they were left waiting and waiting and waiting. So we started going there regularly, at least 3 times a year. And then we also started trailing these animals because we wanted to know how far in Turkey are they going, and are they staying in Turkey or sometimes going even further, because sometimes they were going even on to Iraq. But a few that we trailed went straight to slaughterhouses. So most of them would first go to a fattening farm, but some of them went straight to slaughterhouses, and the animals that were arriving as downers, so no longer able to stand up or walk out on their own because they had broken legs or they were just too exhausted, dehydrated, they weren't ever being humanely euthanized or even stunned and slaughtered immediately, but they were being dragged out by chains and then just left on the ramps. And then when the slaughterhouse would open early in the morning, they would then be dragged through the whole slaughter process. Or sometimes a little bobcat truck would come, or a crane even, and lift them up by one leg, like with a chain around the leg, and then hoisted fully off the floor. And it was so horrible to see that this animal had gone through so much suffering and such a long journey, was dehydrated and hot, and maybe even had injured bones, and then would be treated like that. So we decided we need to start working with the slaughterhouses there. And luckily, I used to live in a Turkish neighborhood in Cologne, and I had a very good friend, Asalat, and I asked him if he could help me. And he was a strict Muslim at the time that I met him, and only ate halal, but didn't really know what that meant. And after working with me a few times in the slaughterhouses in Turkey, his whole world changed. He's now a very, very motivated, compassionate man, and his whole mission is to educate butchers in Turkey about the different options, about animal welfare, about how stunning works, about what's in the Quran, about the essence of the rules of the Quran and the essence of the Prophet Muhammad. And he's doing a terrific job at helping ICE animals change or improve the slaughterhouses there. So yeah, we've got now 2 slaughterhouses, cattle slaughterhouses, that are using stunners to render the animals unconscious before having their throats cut. And one is also switched to an upright restraint box instead of forcing the animal to fall down.
And how do the people working in the slaughterhouse experience those changes?
Some of them didn't want our help, some of them didn't open the door, but most of them did. And a few of those also then started making changes. And so what you do is you focus on the ones that are open for it. I mean, you don't lose time on the ones that don't like you or don't want to work with you. You have to start somewhere, and then you can get the snowball moving. So there were 3 that really made changes. They made the raceways have solid sides just to ease the movement of the animals, stop the fear with the distractions on the side, but also avoid any risk of legs getting caught. They installed extra lighting above the restraint box so that the animals were walking towards the light instead of towards a dark area. That was also reducing the amount of hitting and electric prodding by the workers. And they were seeing that all these little steps were having a positive impact. And also we gave a lot of positive reinforcement, helped them. Each time that we came, they wanted to try new little changes. And finally, then we shocked the crap out of them one day and said, okay, now let's try stunning. And one of them said, okay, let's go for it. And we donated a pneumatic stunner because at the time we couldn't get cartridges into the country. So we had to use pneumatic stunners, which use high pressure air to get the bolt out. And we donated one that was partly financed by 2 big companies here in Europe, installed it. And right away they saw that it was also better for the workers and meat quality. So now they use it, and that was the breakthrough. As soon as you get one plant to accept it, then you'll have a little bit of an easier time to convince the second and third, and then, like I said, the snowball effect starts to work.
I can imagine that you experience a lot of very challenging situations and animal suffering you described that you see. How do you deal with it?
Yeah, I get asked that question all the time, and I never really know how to answer it. I think no matter what, for anyone who sees animals suffering, it affects you. Of course, it's horribly sad. And a lot of people say, well, then how do you handle it? Well, you don't really have an option. I know some people say, I'm too sensitive, I can't see it. But once you see it, you're too sensitive to look away. I think you have no option anymore. You have to stay looking at it, and you have to act on it. Because I think I would have a harder time seeing it and then not acting on it than the opposite. So with every positive step that you achieve, you get this little bit of energy that helps you then confront the next difficult scene and make a change. And yes, I have seen a lot of really heavy suffering. That's true, especially in Ghana, where we started working in 2017. That was heavy. I mean, when you go to a slaughterhouse in Holland and you see pigs being stunned with CO2, it's also sad to watch. I mean, these animals are not comfortable for at least 20 seconds. They're really desperate to get out of their environment with the CO2. But in Ghana, you see animals coming on journeys of over 2 days without food or water, with all 4 limbs tied up. They can't even get up on their own after because their blood circulation's been cut for so long. They're on trucks with no suspension. Some of them are coming with broken legs. So it's heavy, but we've managed to make so many changes there within just 2 years that I don't even really think about all that suffering anymore. I just think forward. I just look forward. I just think, okay, what's the next thing that we can do? And we have such a good team there. There's a local NGO called WACPA, West Africa Center for the Protection of Animal Welfare. It's made up of local Ghanaian guys who have a big heart for animals. Most of them are teachers at high schools, and they don't like the way the animals are being transported or slaughtered, and they want to make a change. And together with us, we go to all these places and teach the people how to use stunners. We donate stunners. We teach them how to maintain the captive bolt pistols. At one slaughterhouse, we've had workers come in to change the lairage and the raceway and the restraint box. They've completely rebuilt it all, and then we show people how to move pigs calmly through the restraint box towards the restrainer. Part of the thrill is also educating people. I mean, these people have never seen it being done differently, so you can't judge them. They grew up seeing that. For them, that's totally normal. And I think for a lot of people, empathy is something you have to learn. So sometimes you have to teach empathy. You have to teach someone to take a moment just to look at a pig and say, how do you think that pig's feeling right now when you're screaming? Can you see that the animal's trembling? Can you see that the animal's eyes are big and he's trying to run away and put his head in the corner? How does he feel? And then you see that they start to think about that animal, and they start to act differently. But you need to invest time in education, not waste it on judging people. That's just a waste of time also for animals. It's easy to feel like you know all the answers, but no one knows all the answers. And if you know all the answers, instead of letting people know they don't know your answers, teach them your answers.
You're just touching about, again, on the way of communication, and obviously interculturally, that doesn't get easier. What was the most profound thing that you learned from that?
I think by traveling into all these different countries with such different cultures and seeing the way animals are being treated, you realize, first of all, that the world is way more complicated than you thought, and that not everyone thinks the same way as you, and not everyone is you. And you become way more open or relaxed about differences. Like you have to adapt to the differences. You can't expect everyone's going to be the same as you. And I think you learn to communicate in a very calm manner, because you can't go, like, we're no longer colonialist. Can't say that word. We're no longer, your task is no longer to go to a country and say everything has to be like my country. You're there just to teach them how animals feel, that they can feel pain and suffering, and how you can handle them in a more humane way. Basically, you're teaching them new ideas that maybe you discovered at your university but have not spread the world yet. I mean, another huge problem that I learned through traveling was everything that I learned in animal science at the University of Guelph regarding ethology and animal welfare was in English. And most of these great scientific reports of ethology are printed in English, maybe another European language. But imagine you grow up in the Middle East and your first language is Arabic, or you grow up in Turkey and you only speak Turkish. How are you going to read about Temple Grandin, for example, and all of her amazing work? So if you don't have access to that information, it's normal that you're not able to think that way yet. So education is the key to solving so many problems, also in animal welfare. And traveling allows you to educate people in countries where they may not yet have access to that information.
Now, coming back to the practical part of things, you said at some point you decided that you wanted to create your own organization. How did you get the funding? How did you practically go about doing that?
Okay, so that's I love that question. So first of all, it's really fun to create your own organization because it's like giving birth. You're creating your own little thing, and there's nothing better than being your own boss because you can make the decisions quickly. You don't have to go through hierarchy or bureaucracy. If you want to act quickly, if you want to send a team into the field tomorrow, all you need is volunteers or freelancers who are willing to do that. But you don't have to wait weeks to make a decision. So that I liked, because if you want to work in the field, you need to be flexible. If you get a call from a truck driver saying there's a problem here at the Turkish border, you want to be on the next flight down, and you can do that when you're your own boss. And to set up your own organization, well, you need a name, and that's super fun to figure out what kind of name you want and a logo. You need to register it. And at the beginning, you don't necessarily need to have money. You need volunteers, and you need time yourself to volunteer. And then you slowly build it up. So if you've got bills to pay, then at the beginning, maybe your NGO will just be a volunteer or NGO that you do when you've got free time, like what you're doing now with your podcast. So you can still change the world with very little money. But as soon as you want to become more professional and also be more off in the field, then you need to start applying for funding. So at the beginning, no one was paid, but we got some funding from donors who heard about our work, or I would write to some people that I knew were business people and had money and say, I want to, send a team to the Turkish border to find out what's going on. We've been getting called by truck drivers. And then as soon as you start your first few investigations, you can put that on a website and people find out about you, and then you get more donors. And sometimes you even get companies that say, hey, I like what you're doing. I'm going to donate to you a captive bolt pistol, for example. We've had that. We even have slaughterhouses in Holland that have donated slaughter equipment so that we can distribute it in Turkey and Ghana. So you just slowly build up your reputation just as you would your own little company.
Getting known is quite a big part of creating funding. How did you go about that?
Well, first of all, some organizations need to be known publicly, like in the media, and the average person on the street needs to know about you in order to get enough money to do your work. So that would be organizations that are really large, like the Dierenbescherming. But you can also be a smaller NGO where you don't necessarily have to be that well known in the media, but companies or people with money have to know about your projects and believe in your projects. And that's just sometimes a matter of writing a letter or giving a small presentation. So at the beginning, I also gave some small presentations to foundations about, for example, our police training. We started training the police in Belgium so that they could apply the law when stopping livestock trucks and enforce the law. And I gave a presentation about that to a foundation, and they said, okay, we like the idea. Here's 10,000 euros so you can train police next year. And I had to be careful with Eyes on Animals because I didn't want to be an organization that put too much focus on getting known in the media, because first of all, it takes a lot of time and effort. If you come home from an investigation and your focus is, we got to get this on TV, you've got to cut the images, you've got to write a press release, you've got to call journalists who sometimes say yes and then last minute say no. And then in the end, okay, you're on TV, and if that really benefits the animals, then you should go for it. But sometimes it also closes doors. And we're an organization that wants to give a chance to slaughterhouses and transport companies to clean up their act before we go right away to the media, unless it's really bad and we know we have no chance to clean it up, or there was no excuse for this horrible treatment of animals. But in general, we want to keep the open dialogue going. So the media is not always the first step when we get back home. It's usually first call the boss and say, hey, why'd that happen? What are you guys going to do to make sure that never happens again?
Yeah, because you mentioned something that really caught my attention, and that was that truck drivers actually call you.
Yeah.
So that really, in a way, is a sign of trust.
Yeah.
I think, that they feel they're not happy with the situation themselves, and they probably are also in a position that they can't always change what they would want to change.
Exactly.
Because they are paid by somebody to drive a truck in a certain time to a certain place.
Yeah.
And there are lots of pressure on them as well. So in a way, it's not only being empathic to the animals, but being empathic to the human, and therefore enable the human to be empathic.
Empathic, exactly. Yeah, I think truck drivers were calling us because they trusted that when we came, we weren't going to right away put an image of him together with the animals in the heat stress of Turkey and paint him black, in a sense.
Yeah.
I think they also trust that we're going to come down to the border to try to find a solution, because no one wants those animals to wait so long, and no sane truck driver would want that either.
Yeah.
And it is a human welfare issue. I mean, this whole industry that has gotten so big and so intensive, there is a lot of human suffering going on too. I mean, I often think of farmers. I know a lot of people don't like farmers, and I agree some farmers are no longer really farmers but more businessmen. But there are a lot of farmers who cannot pay their bills, who are not appreciated by society, who are just trying to do what they thought society wanted, or they're under so much pressure from the banks and the supermarkets to produce, to get bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden, you know, they're the biggest polluters of the world, and they're murderers, and they're not treating animals well. And of course, there's a whole gray zone there. There are people in the farm industry that are very cruel, and there are people that are just struggling to keep up, and there are a lot of farmers who don't even like what they're doing anymore, but they don't have a way out. I mean, I was thinking about that the other day. I'm now 44, and if Eyes on Animals were to close down, I would also think, well, what can I do now? I mean, I could work for another NGO, but it's not like I'm at an age where I can become a ballerina or an actress. And farmers too, they're also, I mean, they learn to be a farmer, and they learn maybe to be a pig farmer, and all of a sudden maybe they have to stop farming. Well, what do you do when you're 50? You can't that easily restart your career. So we have to take care of those questions. We have to take care of those people that are facing that, and also feel partly responsible for how crazy the industry has become.
Yeah, I when I worked in the slaughterhouse, I often thought, how do people keep up doing this job? Yeah. You know, and then I think it's such low-paid jobs as well, with such little respect from society, but it's some of the toughest jobs.
Yeah.
Really.
The highest turnover rate, I think, is in slaughterhouses, and I can understand why. I mean, sometimes they can't even go to the bathroom when they need to go, that they have just one pee break before lunch and one after lunch.
Yeah.
And they aren't always paid well. But mind you, there are some slaughterhouses that now are trying to pay their workers better and have better people welfare. But that means that it's more expensive. And for example, this butcher that helped me in Turkey, he used to have his own slaughterhouse, and he had a lot of work methods put in place to reduce stress for the animals. So he would even use vinegar on the hinds of the animals to stop them from fighting, because they would all smell the same, so you wouldn't have so many hierarchical issues. He always insisted on the animals coming 1 to 2 days before slaughter so that they could calm down in the lairage and get familiar to him. He would use his voice for the animals to come to him when he would be ready to stun them, so that they would be calm. And anyways, he went out of business, because even the top chefs in Holland that insisted that his meat quality was much better because the animals weren't stressed said, yeah, but I can slaughter my animals now cheaper at another plant, which was slaughtering more animals per day. But of course, the more animals you slaughter per day, the less time you have per animal. And time pressure is the worst thing you can have for welfare. As soon as someone's under time pressure, first of all, they don't look at the animals. They don't take the time to look and see how the animals are doing. They're stressed, and the animals feel that stress. It's just the same thing if you're a stressed out mother or father, you're less patient with your kids. Whereas if you've got a support group behind you and you've got time, you can be more attentive. And some of these slaughterhouses that I've gone to, they're so big that even, for example, if a chicken falls from the shackles, there's no time to even put that chicken back on a shackle and tell a break. I mean, that's crazy that it's gotten that far. So that you're often
Students, to come to our
audience.
What would you advise students if they wanted to start working field of NGOs? What kind of equipment do they need to bring to do that?
Well, I think if a vet would like to work for an NGO like Eyes on Animals, the most important is to do your studies really well, to be a very smart and good vet. Languages are really important, especially now. The more languages you speak, the more countries you can work in, the more you can educate. And it's always better talking directly to people than through a translator, because the tone of the message comes across the way you want it to. Get other skills, like being good at taking photos, being a really good driver, being able to handle a non-luxurious lifestyle is also important. Like, are you as comfortable in a small basic hotel without water in Ghana as you are in a nice hotel in Holland? Are you flexible that way? Be open-minded and relaxed about things, and also stay healthy. That's important too. You want to keep a very stable brain, in a sense. You want to be able to handle all these things that come across your path, because they are difficult. So to exercise, to eat well, those are important things. To enjoy also time off. I mean, I've met so many animal welfare people who are burnt out because they've seen so many horrible things, but then also in their free time, they talk about these horrible things. And then they watch videos on Facebook about these horrible things in places where they can never have an impact. And I think just focus on where you can have an impact and try to do your best there, but don't make your whole life animal welfare. Like, have some private time off and watch a comedy film or have some fun with friends and laugh about something silly, so you can be strong in the long term, because we can't solve these problems overnight. So to be sustainable in our efforts, we also have to sustain our well-being.
If you could change one thing in transport and slaughter for more animal welfare, what would it be?
Oh my goodness, that's a huge question. I need time to think about it. If I could change one thing one thing with transport is that we stop transporting animals over these long, long distances just to slaughter them. They should be slaughtered as close to home as possible. And if I could change one thing about slaughter is I would love to get rid of all these poorly designed slaughterhouses that are designed mainly by engineers and not by ethologists, and get slaughterhouses to be built more on animal behavior with engineers' input, but that animal behavior is first place.
Well, thank you very much indeed.
If you wanted to learn more or get in touch, you can visit the website under www.eyesonanimals.com.